today. I tried to start this about a minute ago and OBS crashed, so hopefully you're seeing this. Let me know in the chat if you can actually hear me and see me right now. I see some of you are here. MTM, thanks for joining. Pisk6, thanks again. Great that you're watching from your TV. Hector Yepes, hello again. Segment Terra, good to see you here. Hi Bob, hi Bill. So if you guys can actually hear me, just let me know. That would be appreciated. Yeah, like I said, OBS crashed a minute ago. I made some changes to the stream and the layout to help maybe improve visibility a little bit. I made things a little bit bigger on screen, and I also increased the bit rate of how fast it'll be uploading. So hopefully it'll be a little more fast. And I also added a cool little zoom feature here. So if I do Control-1, I can actually zoom in on things now. So if things are a little too small to see, I'll try to zoom in on them to be visible from now on. So yes. Hi Matrix Tech. So I'm going to assume the stream is working then, so I'll keep going here. So yeah, so today I thought I'd go over blend modes in a live stream. I have several videos about it, and I think it's kind of good to sometimes review topics that I've done in the past and maybe just do a live version to give you guys a chance to ask questions in real time. This is really a big topic, I think, and it's something that will benefit you far beyond Affinity and programs. It's just a common concept in so many graphics programs and Photoshop, GIMP, Inkscape. It's even used a lot in video programs. So like DaVinci Resolve uses it. You can use blend modes for videos just like you can use blend modes for images. Hi Reggie. Hi Mark from Liverpool. Thanks for joining. So yeah, so let me just give you a quick little demo and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about it. Like what are some things you could do with blend modes? So let's say you were making a game or something like that and you wanted to put these assets into make them look a little more interesting. Maybe wanted to make a map or something. Well, of course you can take your image, you can just drag it over like this. But if you kind of know some blend mode tricks, you can actually adjust the blend mode of this to get some interesting results. For example, if I take this, if I set this to multiply, you can see it looks like it's actually part of the map now. And that's just using a simple blend mode. I can also try one of the other ones. I can take this compass here, rows, zoom it in. I'll set that to multiply. Maybe I can do another one. Color burn is another one I can try. So you can see I can get it's a little more colorful effect there. I can even change the opacity, dial it down a little bit. So I'll talk a little more about this in detail later, but if you didn't notice, what I was doing is when I had my asset selected here, I was changing the blend mode of it over here. Let me try that zoom in trick. So yeah, so I was choosing multiply for that. So that's this one here. And then, you can take your words, you can put them over here. And for example, I could also maybe make this some shade of gray. And you can see I'm not really able to see any of the texture behind it, but if I actually change the blend mode to something like multiply, you can actually see the parts of the paper behind your text here. So you're actually getting kind of a pretty cool effect going. So this is just a simple use case of blend modes. This is one of the multiply mode, one of the darkening ones. Let me show you an example of a lightening mode. Let's see. Let's look at this one here. So here I have this car, and let's say I wanted to make the backlights glow a little bit. Well, I could just draw a circle over it. And maybe I could do some FX on this ellipse. I could maybe give it a little bit of a blur here. So I'll give it a little bit of a blur effect. Now, right now, that doesn't look like it's doing much. But if I actually change the blend mode to something like screen, now it looks like it's actually kind of glowing there. And I can take this, I can copy it. I can put it over here too, maybe. I would touch this up more definitely if it was a final result. But you can see with a simple blend mode, we've kind of given it a cool effect. So let me group these together. So if I let's say, hide this, that was before, and now it's after. And I could go and I could change the blurring of that to make it look a little bit better. So I could do Gaussian blur again. Maybe you don't want it to be that strong. Let me close that. I'll change this. Yeah, I can make it a little more subtle with more of a blur. But things like this are kind of what you want to to use blend modes for. And there's many other examples, but just simple effects like this, adding some glowing effect or compositing some graphics onto a map or something. These are very common use cases for blend modes. So I have a slide here showing all of them. Now I know it can be kind of an intimidating topic. So these are all the ones in Affinity programs as far as I know. And the question often comes like, do you have to know what they all mean? Like, do you have to know every single one of these things? And the answer is not really. They're grouped into kind of logical areas, and you'll probably find yourself using 4 or 5 pretty regularly if you start to become comfortable with them. And the other ones you're kind of maybe just experiment with and see if it looks good or not. And among these blend modes, I would say probably about like 80% are common to all the graphics programs. And then all the different graphics programs, they're going to have their own unique ones. Like I think Affinity, like Glow, I think, and Reflect are kind of, the way they're implemented, they're kind of unique to Affinity. And, you can kind of play with them and see what effects you can get. But some of the other ones like Multiply is common to everything. Screen, you're going to see everywhere. Overlay, you're going to see everywhere. So just to give you kind of like an overview of this chat we'll be having today, I won't painfully go into detail in every single one of these. I'll just kind of pick one from each category that I think is kind of useful to know. And then maybe you can kind of start with that one and kind of branch out to the other ones if you want to play with it some more. But hopefully by the end of it, there'll be like maybe 4 or 5 that you'll be comfortable with knowing how to use and just kind of be able to use them when you think it's appropriate. So let's see here. So as I said, let's look at the darkening ones first. Now, in Affinity Photo, or in all the Affinity programs, when you have your blend modes, select drop down here, the ones over here are the darkening ones. So let me do this. So these are all going to be some type of darkening effect. And the effect is going to be different depending on which one you choose, actually. So what I want to show you is a little slide I made. It is, let's see, bring it up. So as I said before, I don't expect you to like have a photographic memory and remember what all of this means. But what I want you to kind of see in this example here is these are all the different darkening modes. And the important thing to notice is that they actually look different, right? You may think, okay, I'm just making an image dark. How many ways are there to make an image dark? But actually there's kind of different ways there's different ways you might want to have it work. For example, we can see multiply here. Well, I should explain what I'm doing here. This is kind of the original layer, and this is our image over here. What I'm doing is I'm taking the image here, dragging it over. I guess I should put it up top. What I've done is I've dragged it over the other ones, and then I've set the blend mode of that to something like multiply or color burn or linear burn or something like that. So that's what each of these results down here are. So when we look at these images, you can see that they're kind of having a different effect. For example, multiply looks kind of desaturated, a little more on the grayish side. I'll put this here. Whereas something like color burn, you can see it still looks kind of like, there's still kind of strong color in the middle here, right? And, darker color, let's zoom into this one. Darker color is very much just taking either the color on the bottom or the color on the top, and it's just choosing it it's a very thresholded blend mode here. So you can see the black is just being completely chosen over here, whereas over here the blues are being completely chosen. Whereas if you look at something like darken, it's actually kind of blending the layers together. So it's kind of taking it's kind of, I wouldn't say averaging them because that's another blend mode, but it's kind of taking a little bit of the top and a little bit of the bottom and giving you a result here. So I kind of skipped over one part that I should have showed you. Let me bring that up. Kind of a basic example of how they actually work. This is what I just showed you on the other one. So typically what you're going to have is like a layer below and then a layer on top. So you can see I have this gray square above my flower here. So let me take my gray square and I'll move it over my flower. Now, even if you've never used a blend mode before, you probably have used blend modes and not even known it, because opacity is actually a type of blend mode. So 100% is just solid. But if I dial it down here, of course, we're all familiar with this effect. You can kind of start gradually seeing through it, but this is a way of blending two layers together. You kind of want a little bit of both layers to show through. And opacity, when you have opacity set to 50%, it's actually the same as the average blend mode, which I'll show later. But if you've ever used blend modes before, you probably have in this sense and not even thought about it as a blend mode. So let me dial this back to 100%. So by default, normally we have something over something else and it's just completely blocking it. But we have the blend modes we can choose. So as I showed you before, we can choose something like multiply, and that's going to darken the layer below it. Now the way it works is that when you have the blend modes, every pixel from the, I should say, like every pixel from the layer above is being mapped to some layer pixel below, and they're being blended by whatever algorithm you've chosen, whether it's one of these multiply ones or one of the lighten ones, and you're going to get some result in the target image. So this is a little bit different than how a adjustment layer works. It is kind of taking something on the top that matches the thing directly under it, blending those two pixels together and giving you a result in the final image that you can see on your screen. So that's essentially how the blend modes work. So let me know if that's kind of confusing or if you're not sure like how they're interacting with each other when you stack them above each other. So the one above, you want to set the blend mode to something, and it's going to affect the one below it. It's going to determine how they blend together. So for example, if I did this over here, if I set this to normal, if I took the one below it, if I set its blend mode to multiply, nothing's really going to happen because it's below this gray square. Whereas if I put this back to normal, the gray square, when I change things to that, when I change its blend mode, it's going to affect the one underneath it. So you want to think of like top going down in your layer stack here. And I should say also that quite often when you have a image on a white background or no background, which is what I have here, the blend modes aren't really going to do anything when you select them. So like I can select anything here and it's not really going to have any effect. Whereas if I had it over another image, you would see them blending together there. So as I said, we have these all these blend modes here. So let's start with probably the most popular one, which is the multiply mode, and that's a darkening mode. Okay, so let's look at that. Now, I'm not going to like give you guys a lot of math or any math really, except for just basically just this one slide. I think because it's called multiply, it's useful to kind of know like why is it called multiply. And the reason it's called multiply ultimately is because the layer above it, what you're going to do is the value you kind of, I don't know if there's a better way to visualize this, maybe the box. Yeah, the box is a little bit better. So you can think of the value as being 0 to 1 or 0 to 100% going from the bottom here. So this is 0 and this is 100% up here, right? So when you multiply something, you're going to, the value here is going to determine how dark it is because you're actually taking that value and multiplying it to the layer below. So for example, if I choose something in the 50% range here, it's going to make the pixel below it 50% as bright. And this is done on a channel by channel basis. So for example, 64 is about 25% of our grayscale range. We have 0 to 255. That's the 255 is the max value we can have, which is white. So the blue value here is 25%. So 25% of 200 is 50 there. And then you can go through the other ones like 127. 127 is this midway point here. So that's about 127. So it's saying for the green channel, multiply the one below it by half. So we get our 75. And then over here we have 255. That's 100%. So that's, I guess that should actually be, this should be 50. Let me check this again. Yeah, this is actually 100. Oh yeah, so it's 255. Yeah, 50% of 255. Yeah, there. So, oh yeah, so 100% is keeping this the same. I'm sorry. Yeah, so 100% of 100 is 100. So let me give you a little easier example here. So if I have a square, I'll make it, let's say, just 127 across. So that's 50%. So you can see this dot here. This is our 50% mark. So that's the color of this square here. So if I do some image, let me just find something. Let's do a tree or something like that. I'll put this on top. So because this is 50% gray, if I set it to multiply, it's multiplying the brightness of the layer below it by 50%. So I'm making my image below about 50% darker. So that's effectively why it's called multiply. You're just considering the lightness on a scale of 0 to 1. So if you're at 50%, you're multiplying the layer below it by 50%. So I'm going to try not to show any more math, but I think some people, they're kind of curious, like, why is it called multiply? So I wanted to just talk about that for a second. So let's look at a more practical example here. And let's say you had this image here and you wanted to make it look darker, right? Well, you could do things like, well, I could draw a square over the whole thing. I could do what I just did in my other image. I could make it gray. Now we know multiply will make things darker. So if I do multiply, my whole image now is darker. So this is before, after. So before, after. There's kind of other interesting things you can do with multiply, which is that you can use it as a gradient. So for example, if I draw this here, I'll do what I did before, but I'll add a gradient to it. Whoops, clicked off my screen here. Let's do this. Let's reverse it. I'll make this part white. I'll make the top part black. So right now this is just a solid color. I can take my gradient here and I can set its blend mode to multiply. And you can see now it's just having a gradual effect in making the top darker. So I can turn it off as before, after. Now what you'll notice with multiply is that white has no effect. So the white part is just going to keep it the same as the layer below it because white is 1.0 essentially. So you're just multiplying the layer below it by 1, which is no change. And then black is making it totally black. So when I turn this back to multiply, you can see that it's totally black up top here. So that's kind of one of the ideas behind multiply is that if you're going to use pure black, you're just going to completely block out your image below. Pure white is going to just do no change. And then levels of gray in between are going to gradually change the value. And you can take this, you can copy it. I could reverse it. Maybe I want the bottom to be dark also. So I could put it down like that. And then using these two things, you know, we have a kind of a different effect going on here, almost like a vignette effect going on. So we added some multiply effect going on there. Now, one thing you can also do is you can actually paint with multiply. So I'll do a pixel layer here. So in Affinity Designer, this is how you add a pixel layer. So I'll add a pixel layer. And I'm in Affinity Photo, sorry. It's the same thing in Affinity Designer. You just go to the pixel persona. And what I'll do is I'll select a brush. Now let me see which brush I'm using. I'll just use some soft brush, one of these soft brushes. And if I choose some type of gray in the middle here, what I have to do is I have to change my layer to multiply. And now I can actually manually kind of paint in some darkness if I want. Again, maybe I could kind of give it like a vignette effect going on. I could use the smudge tool here. So I could do some smudging, maybe. Let's go back to the brush. You know, you could touch this up however you wanted. You could change the opacity a little bit and change that there. You know, you would do a better job of this, of course, if you had a lot of time. But this is essentially one way you could do it with the paintbrush. Also, you don't just have to use basic shapes. And if I set this to normal, that's actually what I painted on my image there. So you can see it's this gray, but when it's multiply, that's what it looks like. So you can use blend modes in a variety of situations, and I'll show you some other ones later on towards the end of the video. So let me know if that's kind of clear, if you have any questions. That was the main one I wanted to show you for the darkening modes, because I think that is the one that is used the most. As I said, if you look at the gallery, multiply does tend to be a little, I guess, less saturated. You know, there's other ones that are good to use. Color burn can be a little, give you more of the color sometimes. And, you know, there's darker and darker color, which darker colors, if you want to make a choice between which color, which layer above or below is the darker one that you want to use. But I just want to focus on multiply because that's one you'll see all the time. So next would be the lighten modes. Let's see. So yeah, lightening. So if you understand the darkening modes, you understand kind of the lightening modes too. I'm going to bring those up. This is just kind of the opposite of the darkening modes here. You can see, once again, we have different ways of lightening our image. Make this bigger. Some are having a different effect, and some are more colorful than others. And you can see some of them are kind of the mirror image of the darkening mode. So we have lighten, there was a darken mode also. We have lighter color. So this is going to choose between your top layer and your bottom layer. It's going to allow the lighter color to come through. So these lights and top grays, they're brighter than the sky here, but over on this side, they're not, than the black. But lighten is going to kind of do more of a blending effect going on. But those are kind of besides the point. The main one on this by far is screen. That's the one that's the most popular, the screen blend mode. It's kind of the opposite of multiply. So let's look at a couple examples of that. Screen is cool because it's a nice way of removing blacks really quickly. So if I have this moon shape here, let's put it over here. What I can do is with my image here, this is my moon, I can set the blend mode to screen. And what you notice when I do that is that the black basically goes away. And this is kind of the opposite of what I said with multiply. So with the screen blend mode, the black color is going to disappear and your white is going to remain there. So just to kind of show you, let me make a copy let me put this in the normal mode. So this is what it normally looks like, and this is what it looks like if I did screen. Now if I did multiply, it probably looks very similar to its original thing. Yeah, multiply isn't really an effect you want to go for here, because this black is just going to be totally black. So you don't really want to do darkening. In this case, what you want to do is you want to emphasize the lights of this. And a lot of times when you're downloading templates or like extra graphics and stuff, they'll tell you whether or not you want to use multiply and screen. It kind of depends on the design of the texture. But what you'll find a lot of times is that you'll get these graphics where it's all black on the background and there's like bright colors, some type of texture, maybe it's scratches or some type of effect, and instructions will tell you to set it to the screen mode. Or sometimes they'll be the opposite and they'll tell you to set it to the multiply mode. So those are the two main ones for compositing here. Yeah, you can also do the gradient for these as well. So let's do that again. I'm in Affinity Designer now, right? But it doesn't actually matter. So once again, let's set this to screen. So if you want to say lighten up the bottom, so the black isn't going to have any effect there, but if I set this to like something like bright white, it is. So let me show you what this normally looks like. If I go to normal, so that's what this looks like here. But then if I set the screen, we get this. Now I think probably in this example, like screen, it looks a little white and boring there on the bottom. You can try other blend modes. So for example, maybe something like color dodge. And maybe we don't go so extreme with our bottom color here. So maybe instead of pure white, I'll do some type of gray. So I'll do that. So you can see like this is our kind of a nice effect on the bottom of the image here. So in this case, I didn't use the screen mode. What I used was color dodge. Now to be honest, color dodge is one of those, I know it lightens things. I can't like predict what it's going to do just by looking at it. Usually I have to play with this one a little bit, but it is a good one to try if you want to like preserve your colors more. So I think this is kind of a cool effect here. So again, if I go to screen, it looks kind of gray and boring, but if I go to the color dodge, it actually maintains the color a little bit better and does brighten it up. And we have these gradients, you can kind of move them around and play with things a little bit. So I could lighten up my whole image like that. So this is, say, before, after, before, after. Almost looks more like a fantasy picture or something with the blue clouds. So like I said, screen is kind of the counterpart to multiply, and it's I think probably the most popular of the lighten blend modes. So it's a good one to know. So let me close these. Now, next we have the contrast modes, and if you understand darkening and lightening, you understand the contrast modes, because the contrast modes actually will combine a darken blend mode and a lighten blend mode into just one blend mode. So you don't have to constantly switch back and forth. So you may wonder like, okay, how does that actually work? Let me show you an example. So with a contrast blend mode, a good one to talk about is like hard light. So, usually you can think of your entire value spectrum as going from black to white. What something like, say, hard light is going to do, the top values are going to be your screen effect, and the bottom values are going to be a multiply effect, okay? That might not be kind of clear what's happening, but let me show you here. So here we have this is like a gradient I had, and I just dragged it over and I set its mode to one of the blend modes. So here we have the multiply blend mode for that gradient. Here we have the screen mode, and here we have the hard light blend mode. And what you'll notice is with the hard light, this is actually the same as, it's basically the same as doing this here. Imagine we had the bottom half of our gradient is multiply and the top half is screen. So that's what our hard light is. It's having screen on top and multiply on the bottom. Okay. So let me give you an example of like how we could actually use that. Let me show you. So I could show you using it with the pixel layer. So let's do that. On a pixel layer here. Hard light. So I'll set this to hard light. And what you'll notice is that if I take a brush, I'm going to go to pixel persona. If I color with a, say, a lighter value up here. Where's my layer here? Oh, yeah. So it's lightening it, okay? So I'm lightening it because I'm using a brighter color above 50%. So I'm lightening my sky up here. Now, if I choose a darker color, it's actually darkening it. So within the same layer, I have the hard light set. I'm actually able to lighten or darken based on what value I choose. Now, if I choose kind of like right in the middle at 50%, I don't know if that's exactly 50%, but it's pretty close. You can see it basically has no effect. It doesn't really change much. But if I actually go brighter, I can lighten up my area. And if I go to darker, if I go, very dark, it's darkening. And I'm showing you hard light here, but by far the more popular blend mode here is overlay. So overlay is another way of using a bright value. Another way of having a single blend mode contain a way to brighten things and darken things. So let's look at an overlay example. Yeah, so in this example, let's say I will create a pixel layer. And I'll set it to overlay. So you're going to hear about overlay a lot. That's probably the third most popular blend mode next to multiply and screen. So if I set this to my overlay layer, this is really nice for doing things like shadows and highlights within one layer. So if I want to brighten up the sky, I could just paint over here, and I'm painting with a brighter color, you can see. So that's my way of brightening the sky there. Now on that same layer, if I want to darken some other area, maybe I want to darken the grass down below, I'll choose a darker color. And I can darken this area here. Maybe I want to darken the cliff a little bit. You can decide what you want to do. Maybe I want to darken this area in here. But if I set this to normal, and hide it, it's a little hard to see because there's the checkerboard background, but you can see the top I painted gray in there, and a lighter gray, and the bottom I painted a darker gray. So overlay is the one, like, you're probably going to use that a lot if you want to just have one layer that lets you lighten and darken things. Now, let me show you a summary of the contrast modes, because this is kind of useful, I think. So all these contrast modes here, these lights and things like that, and the overlay, hard light, soft light, all that kind of stuff, what they're really doing is they're basically stacking like I showed you, a light mode on top of a dark mode. And again, not something you have to like memorize, but just you can just kind of remember like, oh, that's the concept behind it. It's combining some type of lighten thing and some type of darken thing. So vivid light is color dodge above color burn. So if you're doing a layer with vivid light, anything above 50% is going to have a color dodge effect. Anything below 50% is going to be a color burn effect. And overlay is kind of like screen on multiply. There's a little bit of, it changes the math a little bit, but essentially that's what it's doing. So it has some additional changes to make the color pop a little bit more, because hard light literally has screen on top of multiply, and it has a little bit of that desaturating effect where it's a little grayer than you want it to be. So overlay makes some adjustments there. And then some of these other ones, you know, they just combine the other lighten and darken modes on it. So that's essentially what the contrast modes are doing. And when we talk about contrast modes, I'm talking about the light ones here, the ones that are in this area here. So that's why they're grouped together. They're kind of logically related. So next we have the comparative modes, and these ones are a little more niche. They're kind of a little more rarely used, but I think there's kind of a couple cool use cases. Let me show you that. I think there's a cool one for difference. So these modes are the ones that are, I'll just select something here. They have these kind of mathematical names. So difference, exclusion, subtract, divide, these guys here are comparative modes. And I think difference actually has a pretty cool use case. Let me open it up in Affinity Photo. Hello, I'm trying to pronounce your name. Aikiko Dokrates. That's as close as I can get. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Thanks for joining from Germany. So difference is interesting. It's very useful for a lot of kind of image processing cases if you want to actually find the difference between two images. So I have these two images, and let me get it so you can see both of them here. So this image is technically on the top of the layer stack. Let me set its blend mode to difference. They're exactly the same right now. So if I set its blend mode to difference, if I drag this over this other image, when they perfectly are aligned, if I can get it perfectly aligned, I don't know why it's not snapping. Okay, now they're perfectly aligned now. You can see it's completely black, right? Yeah. Let me center them perfectly. Yeah, okay. So it's completely black because they're the same image. And when you take the same thing and you delete it from itself, it's going to be black. Now, a cool use case here is what happens if there's some change between these two images. So let me take this image here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the in-painting brush tool. And maybe I'll just erase a bird there, like that. Maybe I'll erase another one. So I took out two birds with my brush. Hi, Rolex. So what happens now is if I take this and I drag it over, watch what happens. You can actually see the difference between these two graphics. You can see what is actually different between the two of them. So these are the two birds that I erased. So it's showing you essentially, it's a quick way of actually seeing a difference between two images. And I think it's kind of a cool thing. Like, again, in real life, if you took two photographs of the same thing, there can be tons of differences because in real life things change from second to second. But you know, if someone like manipulated an image, or you're wondering if there's if two images are exactly identical but someone made a little bit of a change in one of them, you can use the difference command for these things. You can also use it for like aligning the edges of photos. So for example, if one horizon matches the edge of another image that you have, you can kind of match the edges of the horizon there. I guess you could do something like that here, maybe. So let me turn off snapping. If we pretend these are two different photos, I could kind of maybe see like where do they actually match up the best there if I want to like get the horizons matched. That's one way you could do it. Of course, it doesn't work with this image because it's kind of the same image, but there's many kind of use cases for that one. But I think that's the main one I find interesting in that group, the comparative groups. The other ones, exclusion, subtract, divide, they're a little more niche. There's some use cases for these guys. We can get some kind of cool effects. I guess divide is used sometimes for some lighting effects, but difference is the one I thought was the most visually interesting to look at. Hi, Mark. Reading your comment. Glad you like the tutorials and glad they helped you with Affinity Designer. Thanks for the comment. So let's look at the next group. The next group was after comparative. Yeah. So then we have our component ones. Now the word component, what it's talking about is the components of our color. Okay, so the hue, color, saturation, luminosity. This is going to take these values from our top layer, our blend layer that we set that for, and it's going to apply them to the layer below it. So let's find an example for that. So components. Let's look at color and hue. Now what I did ahead of time is I created like a pixel outline of this. It's definitely not the best pixel outline ever, but you can see it's just very solid color here, and it's just pixels. So what I can actually do is well, one thing you might think of doing is, okay, if I change the opacity, maybe I change my car color a little bit, but it's not really a very satisfying effect, right? We can actually use blend modes much better than that. So what I'll do is I'll choose the hue blend mode. And now we've turned our car red. So it's essentially, it has taken the red of our car and it's just replaced the hue in the layer below it with red. And when we have this pixel layer here, I can easily change that. So it's a pixel layer. Let me, I can paint it something else. I can paint it. Let me do a solid brush here. I can paint it green. I guess I forgot to actually do. So what I forgot to do is I forgot to enable alpha lock, which is off screen, protect alpha. So it's going to limit my painting to this area here. So now I can change the color of my car. I can make it a rainbow car if I wanted. You can do like anything you want really. But what all I'm doing here is just changing the colors on my pixel layer. High CO7, and this is what it looks like in normal mode. But what it's going to do is when I select hue, it's going to apply that to the layer below it. I can get back to something relatively normal here. Now there's another mode with a similar name called color. So let's choose that, color. And in this example, you're not really going to see much of a difference. The difference between hue and color is that color is much better at getting color into grayscale layers below it, and hue is not. So we have part of our image up here. This part of our image is kind of gray. Let's say we wanted to paint this wall here. Let me go back to pixel persona. Let's just do like a sharp red color. So if I set this to hue, it's not really that great because there's not a lot of hue in the layer below it. There's kind of a gray layer underneath it. But if I do it again, I set to color, it's actually a little bit better. You can see it's having a stronger effect. So color is actually good at adding color to grayscale layers below it, whereas hue is not. Hue, you can't, if your hue of the layer below it, if it's completely desaturated, you can't add any hue to it afterwards. Let me show you a better example. Let me show you a pure black and white image. Something appropriate for the stream, not that image. Let's just find, I don't know, this flower. So, okay, I want to make this flower yellow. This is my great selection here, right? Just a circle. So if I make it yellow here, if I make the circle yellow, if I set it to hue, nothing actually happens because it's a gray layer and the saturation is essentially 0 everywhere. I mean, it's black and white, so if we look at it, our saturation is 0 all over the place. However, if I set this to color, it actually is able to add color to it. So color is good. There's some other subtle differences, but color is good when you're trying to add color to something that's black and white. Hue can't really do that. So that's kind of why color exists. If you're kind of also like interested in super technical details, hue isn't just replacing the hue of the layer below it. It's also doing a little bit of a tweaking of the lightness and the saturation, because when you're changing the hue from certain colors have different perceived values of lightness and saturation. So that's something to consider a little bit there. Mark, so if you're kind of looking, what I'm trying to say is if you're looking for like a mathematical blend mode that just replaces the hue exactly with the hue below it, you're not actually going to find that. You're going to find it is changing the saturation and lightness a little bit. So Mark, reading your comment. So yeah, so you're saying, have I considered a tutorial where I've considered albedo, normal, and roughness maps for a decal made in Affinity that can then be used in a 3D scene? Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I think it's my adjustment layers video. I think that's the part where I talk about I talk about normals a little bit in that, but I haven't talked about how to use create those maps yet. I've done a little bit of that, and I'm kind of going to do some procedural. I'm looking into some procedural textures right now, so that might lead into that. And I am interested in this topic, and I think I think a lot of AI can also be used to kind of generate some of these textures that can be used in 3D programs too. So yes, thanks for the suggestion. Like I said, I've touched on it briefly. I don't know if I'll make a full video on it, but it might be kind of tangentially related to something else I do in the future. So yeah, so thanks for the comment there. So that was, and I showed you hue and color here. The same thing can happen with saturation. So if I want to, let's find a colorful image. So if I have a very colorful image here of, say, flowers. Okay, so if I want to desaturate it, I can make the saturation of my image like this very low, and then I can change this to saturation, and it basically makes them gray. Okay, so it's a square. You'd want to do a better selection in real life, but like that, the gray square has 0 saturation, so it's giving 0 saturation to what it covers below. That's cool. You like creating decals and posters. Yeah, I think there's a lot of use cases for that, and hopefully more people will kind of use Affinity for that type of thing. Like I see a lot of people trying to create assets for Blender and some other 3D programs like Unreal Engine, like you mentioned, and they're kind of struggling with GIMP or something, or Inkscape, and I think Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer have a lot of capability in that area too. So yeah, thanks for the comment. Okay, moving on. Let me close some of these guys. Do some housekeeping here with my tabs. How are we doing for time? 43. And now we have the famous other category, because I couldn't really think of a better name. Just lots of some things. There's a couple of interesting ones in this group here. Let me look at the average is one I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. Let's bring up average for a second. My mouse just jumped. Average is kind of interesting because it's the same as 50% opacity. So if I take this, let's say orange rectangle, I put it over my image here. So let's take average. Hi, Jim. Thanks for joining. I'll set this to average. So this is the average of these two images, the average of the orange rectangle and the image below. If I take this same square and I put it over, if I set this to 50% opacity, it's basically the same thing. So average and 50% opacity are kind of the same result here. I'm not really sure like why you would use average instead of just 50% opacity, because with the opacity setting, you have you have 100 different settings you can do, not just 50%. You can do like 25%, you can do 10 or something. You can do all sorts of different values here. So as far as I know, average is just opacity for 50%. So that's kind of a little fun fact, I thought. There's another more interesting one I call in the other category, which is the erase mode. Let's look at that one. This one's kind of a special one. I don't know if it's special, but it's kind of unique. So let's say we wanted to, we have this white bar here. Make this bigger. We can take the word New York over here. We can make it black or something. But what if we wanted it to like actually just cut out this square so we could like see through it? We could see through. So instead of being black, we could actually see through the white square and into the buildings and scenes behind it. What we can do is we can use the erase mode. And what the erase mode will do is it'll essentially just take your shape and cut a hole straight through your layer stack to show you the background. So I'll set this to erase, and that's the most bottom one. It's kind of its own little category down here. I'll zoom in. So This is the erase mode down here. So I'll set it to erase. And you can see we didn't quite get the effect we wanted. It actually erased through our whole image. So now you're seeing like the transparency below it. And the reason that happened is when I had New York selected here, it's just literally erasing through everything. So the way we can actually solve that is we can actually group this New York with the rectangle here. So let me select both of these and I'll group it. And then when you do that, it actually won't, the effect of the erase won't go outside of your group here. So now if I move this group around, you can see my word New York is actually, the transparency is limited to the area I want it to be. I can actually, see the buildings and stuff behind. And there's kind of a more advanced topic about, well, if you want this New York to go through everything, you can actually change this to normal, I believe. Or maybe you have to change that. There's a way you can do it, but I won't add more confusion to the matter here. But what I'll just say is if you want to actually use the erase mode in a limited scale of just like cutting out of something, I would say think of grouping things together. So let's say maybe I want to have a shape here and I want to cut a heart out of it or something like that. I'll just make it green so it stands out. So again, if I wanted to cut out that shape, there's different, you can use Boolean operations. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do. But let's say I just wanted to have the heart cut out of that. I could say erase. Again, it's cutting through everything, but I would select it all. And if I grouped it, it would just be limited to that shape there. So I think that's a cool use of the erase mode. There's some other effects you can do with it, but that's kind of the basics of it there. So with that, we've essentially covered this kind of a crash course in the blend modes and how they work. And like I said, I have a longer video on this that goes into some more mathematical details and gives examples of like using every single one of these. But I kind of just wanted to do the stream here today to give a kind of an overview of how they work. And if nothing else, just kind of show you that they are grouped into logical categories here. You don't need to know what all of them do, but if you kind of have a high level understanding of what each category is for, for example, there's a darkening, there's a lightening. The contrast is combining a darkening and lightening. Comparative is kind of, you're probably not going to use that one too much, but component I think is one you will use a lot. If you want to take a component of color in one layer and apply it to a layer below, that's one to look at. And the other blend modes are kind of, again, a little bit random, but erase is a good one to know. And what I'll say too is, let me create a new image here. Yeah. So blend modes, they're not just used in this drop down over here. I mean, they're used all over the place. So if you do something like, I don't know, create a background here. And let's say you create some text, right? And it's white. I don't know, choose some type of thing. And you give it a stroke. Okay, so then you go in, what do? You add a drop shadow to it, right? So if I go to effects, if we go to outer shadow, look what outer shadow is really just a fancy way of applying a multiply filter here. So if I add the shadow, make it big so you can see it. So you can see the drop shadow here. The whole reason this effect works is just because it's giving some kind of blur effect and it's setting it to multiply. I can actually set it to you can set it to other things if you wanted to. I wouldn't really recommend it. Multiply is usually the best one. But that's all the outer shadow is doing. That's why you're getting that effect going on there. I can also do, let's say, outer glow. That's probably screen. Yeah, outer glow is screen. So if I do this is what we talked about for our screen effect. It's lightening up the area behind it. Okay, so blend modes come up in a lot of places. They also come up when you do adjustments. So if you do, I'm trying to think of a good adjustment here. It's not really a good one because it's white text, but if you did anything like, let's do this. Will this look interesting? Maybe posterize will do something. Yeah. So again, you can kind of choose like, okay, what blend mode do I want the posterize effect to take? So all your adjustments, you can actually do different blend modes for them. 99% of the time I do normal, but sometimes you'll want to do other stuff here. So I can apply as the contrast modes here, can do these different comparative effects, hue, saturation, lightness, lots of ways that blend modes are used. So I'm just kind of trying to show you that blend modes aren't just this little drop down here. Don't be surprised if you see them in other parts of the interface. So that was that topic. If you guys have any questions on that, certainly you can leave a comment now or comments on this video. I'll try to answer them. I know it's something that's kind of intimidating people to this because there's so many of them, and it's like, when do you use what and which ones are important? So I kind of want to do a live stream on it and just give an overview of it for that purpose. So with that, I'll go into the questions that I got this week on some of my videos. So let's go over those. So got some comments about the Affinity 2.5 beta live stream. A couple things people wanted to see. Let me show you some other things. So I got this comment from Kappas Wong. How about the auto close for the pencil tool? Yeah, let me open up the beta here. Hi, MTM. Doing well. I do not want to update right now, live on stream. Cancel. Yeah, create. So their question or their comment was that the pencil tool now has an auto close feature. So if I select the pencil tool and yeah, so this is auto close here. So you can see this. So what happens now is if I draw something, it doesn't close. Make the stroke bigger. But if I select auto close, if I do this, it still doesn't close, because the change they made is that now you actually have to be kind of closer to where you were. So now it will auto close. So here we go. So now, I don't know if that helps you guys see, but when you're closer, you'll get that little icon now that will actually auto close it. Like that. Whereas I think previously it if you kind of had auto close select, like even if I let go here, it would close it. But now with the new feature, it only does it if you're close in the area like that. Hi Dwight, no problem being late. Yeah, time zones are definitely tough, especially after daylight savings time and things like that happen. No problem, I don't keep attendance, so no penalty for being late. So question from Bob the Guy. So he said, when you're using RGB color profile for printed objects, you do not see a difference between your screen image and the actual printed product? Yeah, there's definitely a difference. And what I tend to do is given the style of designs I do, I tend to oversaturate on my screen to get better results on the printed output. So far, I've never really had complaints about the products I've done. So like I said, I use Printify. I do desk mats, rugs, mouse pads, phone cases. Those are my main things. And the colors always look great to me. If you're like super specific about color, yeah, it could be an issue. What I recommend is, some people do this where they order a sample product, like say if you want to do a phone case and you get a sample of it, and your design is just literally a color palette of the colors you use. You just put like a grid of squares on a phone case, and then you just send yourself a sample to see how it looks. So if you're super concerned about colors, you can try that. So far, I haven't had problems, but I know some people do that with t-shirts. They'll just order a sample t-shirt and they'll print a grid of their color palette on it so they can compare. If you have really strict relationships between colors, that may be a thing you want to try. But, like I said, my designs, a lot of them are kind of like retro 80s stuff, and people kind of expect there to be crazy colors and clashing and all that kind of stuff. So I guess it works with my niche. But yeah, there's always going to be a difference between what you see on screen and what you see in real life, because your screen is emitting color with electricity and energy, and in the real world you're dealing with whatever light is ambient and being reflected off your product, so it's not always going to look the same, definitely. But I mean, Printify and all those places, they always recommend using, a lot of them these days are recommending just using RGB to start with, so that's what I do. So yes. Yes, I got a bunch of comments about the QR shape feature. So this was another Affinity 2.5 beta addition, the QR code. So I think the comments were generally from Sekhmet Terra, Arail, Gil Brooks about can you add images to QR codes and things like that. So let's try that. So what you should know is that the reason this, you've probably seen QR codes where they do like some type of like fancy little images or something in there. So what you can do is you can actually do that if you wanted to, but let me draw a QR code here. Let me turn that off. And I don't know what website we should use. I'm trying to find something like long and complicated. So I searched Google Images for flowers. Let's use a really long result here. Maybe that's too long. Did I just find a bug? So Bob, you said your concern is that they will notice a difference from what they see on the computer. Yeah, that's an issue. And what you can do is a lot of times, going back, this is about the RGB color. A lot of times what people do is they just, when they do a mock-up of something, they'll take like a t-shirt and they'll literally just take the image and they'll put it on top of the t-shirt. And that's not how it's going to look when it prints out in real life. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll adjust the opacity of their mock-up. So they'll take their graphic that they put over their image. They'll dial down the opacity. Maybe they'll desaturate it a little bit to make it look a little more realistic. And if you have an actual sample next to you, you can do that for one design and kind of get an idea of like how much should you dial down the saturation for your mock-ups if you don't want to order samples for everything. And then you can kind of go from there. So yeah, I'd say that's a real thing I see. You see that on Etsy or you see that on shops where customers sometimes complain. And I think a lot of times it's because people don't use good mock-ups that like the mock-ups, like I said, they just literally take an image, put it over a t-shirt and then call that the mock-up, which isn't what you want to do. You actually, a lot of times you want to use like a blend mode, like multiply or something with a little bit of opacity dialed down. So it's good when you can kind of keep customer expectations in line. Hi, Ismail. Let me just find out. I'm just trying to find a good URL to use for this demo. I don't know. Moon is kind of the one I always use. Something like long. All right, natural satellite. So if I do this, okay. So yeah, so the words I used, that's the word I used. So you can see actually as you add more letters, as you would expect, it gets more complicated, right? Like when you can start to see the details become more fine-tuned. So let me export this. And I'll export this as a PNG. And let's put it somewhere interesting. It's from last week. Let's delete these. Let's call this QR1. So I found this website where you can upload your QR codes and it will tell you what they mean. So let me bring that up. So yeah, so Bob, you're saying CMYK can make it look more realistic. Yeah, you can try that too. I think it's just going to depend on like the product. Like different printers are better with color than others and things like that. I'm just bringing up this QR site. So yeah, again, I would recommend samples if you're super concerned about it, and then compare your mock-ups to the samples. I just have to disable my ad blocker on this site that I use for the QR codes. Let me just do this for a second. Pause always. Okay, I think it works now. Good. Okay, so this is a site where you can just upload an image of a QR code, and it'll tell you where it goes. So this is the one I just made, and you can see here it goes. It points to this image here. So that's cool. So the question is, how much damage can we do to this? And the reason this whole thing works, where you put graphics inside QR codes, is because within QR codes there's redundancy. So they're designed so that maybe they can be torn a little bit, or the camera doesn't quite get a good image. So the information that's in this QR code, there's redundancy in here. And you can kind of get away with the middle, sometimes like just blocking stuff out a little bit. So if I want to put like my name in here, I don't know, Maybe you had like a business card or something you wanted to, I don't know, be cool or something. I don't know, let's go for this. Let's see if this actually works. So I'll export this one, file, export, QR2. So you just want to be careful with this because some QR codes might be better than others at recovering from the errors. So in this example, it didn't find it. So it said no QR code found. Let's go back to it. What if I make it smaller? Let's try this. Let's try 3. All right, so that one found it. So that was a good size. So on this one, I could get away with this, but if I went bigger, it wasn't able to find it. So like I said, the QR codes, they have redundancy, so you can override a little bit of it, but if you go too crazy, you can actually just like damage it too much. And again, I don't know exactly the structure of it, so maybe some parts of it you can get more clever with, but that's kind of just a basic thing that I've done where you just get overwrite kind of the middle area. So it's really, and I think it's also going to depend on the length of the text here. So if it's something smaller, again, maybe this would actually, maybe I could get away with more if I did that. Let's try this last one. Yeah, so still, it didn't like that one. So you'll have to play with it. I think it is kind of a little bit, you're kind of playing with fire when you do this, because sometimes, like I said, the QR code reader itself, some may be better than others, and they may be able to recover from the errors more than others. So that's, something you can try. But I guess, keeping it small and in the middle seems to be somewhat safe. Just test it and make sure it's actually working. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. So another question about 2.5, does the line width tool work only symmetrical, or can we have more width on one side? So let me show you guys what that question is referring to. So we have this new tool called the line width tool. So if I take my pencil, if I draw a shape there, this is the new tool here, the stroke width tool. So what this is doing is, in the old days, you would adjust the pressure curve here, and you could actually change the pressure of certain parts of your stroke. But that's a little bit cumbersome. You can now select your line here, and you can use this stroke width tool. And if you zoom in, you can actually make parts of your stroke more or less thin. It kind of gives it a cool little tapering effect there. You can make the ends just like super sharp if you want, and just gives a little more character to your lines. So the question is it always symmetric? And I think I looked on the forums, and it seems like the answer is yes. So whatever you do to one side, it's going to happen on the other side. Like I couldn't just make like this side, I couldn't just make like this side, super long and this side short. They have to be the same on both sides. So yes, I think they do have to be symmetrical so far as of the 2.5 beta. So Kranos, hope that answers your question. And I got a question from Waldo. I released a video this week about assets, and his question was, where are they physically placed on the disk, and can they influence where they are stored? I think, so I looked on this, and I found the answer on the Affinity forums about where they're stored. Of course, it's going to depend on your platform here. So if you Google it, or they have the, they tell you the locations. I won't read it in painful detail here, but like you can see it's basically on your profile. There's an Affinity folder on Windows, and it's under the user, some type of user folder there for them. And on Mac OS, it's different. But I think, can you change it? I don't think so. And I think I kind of know where you're going with this. Like, can you actually put them on a shared drive and back it up like Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox or something? And as far as I know, you can't. So I think what you have to do is, if you have assets, what you would have to do, so the window, let me show you. If you had your assets, if you wanted to actually share them between computers, I think you'd have to go to Window, Export Assets, and And that's like a special assets folder, and then you could import that onto your other machine. Like I said, if you're on one computer, you can actually just link your assets with a link category here. So if you're on one computer, you can share assets between photo, designer, and publisher. But across different computers, I think you have to go and do export for the assets that way. So unfortunately, I think it's not that flexible. So that's my answer to that one, based on what I read on the forums. So that's the last question I have. I'll let it I'll give you guys another couple of minutes if you want to ask any last minute questions about anything, the blend modes or any other topics. Bob, hope that answered your question. Like I said, I've had okay luck with color, but if it's, you may want to order like at least like one sample per product you're using just to see like, is it a drastic difference? Sometimes things like a maroon might come out more blue than red or something, right? Like these colors are kind of in between. They might surprise you with what they actually come out with. So it can be good to order samples of things. But once you order like one sample of a product, usually that's good to kind of understand like what the colors are doing there. So yeah, so today the topic was blend modes. I think next week I might do adjustment layers, just 101, kind of give an overview of that topic and perhaps some logo design in the future. So that might be another topic coming up. If you guys have any suggestions, I remember I got the suggestion about the textures for Unreal. So that's something interesting. I don't know if I'll specifically target Unreal, but I'm looking at, again, the procedural textures, and that's something I want to do soon, and that might have some relation to creating textures and bump maps and normals for these 3D programs. So yeah. So with that, I think I'll sign off. Thanks guys for joining. Thanks everyone for your questions, and I appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll see you next week. So have a good one.